Hey guys, it's the Villain Man here, home theater enthusiast and lover of all things tech, and today we're comparing two of the best and brightest OLED TVs of 2023, the LG G3 with its WRGB panel as well as the Samsung S95C with its QD-OLED panel. And I'll tell you from the jump, there are some very interesting differences. Now the G3 uses LG Display's MLA architecture, which is their micro lens array, which reflects one's lost light back to the viewer, so the overall picture ends up being brighter, while the S95C uses Samsung's quantum dot layer and removes the color filter, so the removal of that filter helps more light get to you, the viewer, and the overall result is a brighter picture as well. And it uses the quantum dot layer to achieve what the color filter did in the past on other TVs. So those respective technologies have resulted in some of the brightest consumer OLED panels ever produced, so we are pretty spoiled in 2023, but we know that they have a great picture for movies. But how do they perform while gaming? So to do the test, I'll of course be using my gaming PC, the Villa Consola version 2, and my PC has an Intel 7800X CPU as well as a GeForce RTX 4090 GPU, and it has 32 gigs of RAM as well, so it's pretty stacked. So we can use this now to compare in some competitive high frame rate gaming like Overwatch 2 to see just how well those low input lag and fast response time help each TV, as well as see just how well they perform with shadow detail as well as color reproduction. I'm not sure why, but I was having a hard time getting the PC to display HDR while in mirroring mode at 4K at 120 Hz. Using the extend monitor mode, it displayed HDR perfectly fine, but not when actually using the mirroring mode, which is what we need to directly compare these two TVs. Oddly enough though, in-game HDR was enabled, so yeah, go figure. If you know why this is, you can let me know in the comments. And just so we have a fair playing field, the Eco mode is disabled on both TVs and they're set to 100% brightness and game modes. Also note that areas of the screen that seem overblown aren't actually overblown in person, but it appears that way because the camera just can't capture the brightness output of the TV, so it can't fully capture the dynamic range of the screen. That said, the first thing you notice is the brightness difference between the G3 up top and the S95C below. Now the top LG G3 is a 77-inch TV, while the Samsung S95C is a 65-inch version. But that shouldn't really have an effect on the overall brightness output, so the brightness difference we're seeing here is just the difference in capabilities of both TVs. And the Samsung is by no means a dim TV. It gets really bright in its own right, but the G3 here is just brighter. The next difference we see that's really obvious is the difference in color reproduction. Now we can see on the Samsung where the colors are just more vibrant and saturated and seem a bit more cartoony, very fitting for this cartoony game, but it seems a bit overdone in some instances, especially when compared to the G3, which has a more muted color reproduction that's not overdone. You can see where primary colors especially are really pronounced on the Samsung, and I've seen this be a calling card for quantum dot TVs in general, whether it be LED backlit LCD TVs or QD-OLEDs like we have here. If we look on the green and red colors on the gun, you can see exactly what I mean. Those colors on the Samsung just seem that much more saturated than they appear on the LG. And of course, this is one of those things where it's personal preference because some people like that presentation, but some people don't. Let me know in the comments which one you fall under. Do you prefer the more saturated look of the Samsung or the more muted look of the LG? The other difference between these two TVs is one that really surprised me, and it's actually the shadow detail. Now, both TVs have a game optimizer setting where you can adjust the black levels, but that doesn't really add shadow detail, it just raises the black level of the TV. So it's very interesting to see a switch in characteristics where the LG has the better shadow detail reproduction and the Samsung isn't quite as good as it appears on the LG. So the shadows on the S95C aren't quite as well defined and as detailed, I should say, as they appear on the G3. The G3 can just see more details in the shadows, which was a hallmark of Samsung in the past, where they would have better shadow performance than LG's TVs, especially when I compare them directly. But it's interesting to see that is switched, the roles are switched now. When we're talking strictly performance, I do see some screen tearing on both TVs, and they happen at the exact same time. So I'm thinking that even though I enabled G-Sync in the NVIDIA control panel, it just didn't translate very well to this game for some reason. I think it may be another result of the screen mirroring, so the direct comparison, but that's a compromise we're going to have to deal with. I've used the LG by itself and it's performed flawlessly with all the gaming features like VRR and G-Sync and all of those. So I have no doubt that outside of this direct comparison, it will perform as great as it should. And I don't see any reason why the S95C should be any different. But continuing with performance, there does seem to be a faster input lag on the Samsung. So the actions on the Samsung happen just a microsecond faster than they do on the LG. And this is splitting hairs, of course, but a win is a win. And in practice here, the Samsung does have the lower input lag. It's definitely not something you would notice outside of this direct comparison though. It's that minute.
Time for the reckoning!
Give it a fair shake, mate.
30 seconds remaining.
Losing now would be such a shame.
Let's move on to Cyberpunk 2077, and this game, unlike the previous one, first has a lot lower frame rate, but is also in SDR and not HDR because I could not get HDR to work in the mirrored mode. That said, this is a great test of how games perform in SDR as well, and we see where in the shadow areas, especially those under the ledge here, where the LG has just a bit more shadow detail than the Samsung does. The Samsung otherwise though appear more contrasty and the colors pop a lot more than they do on the G3. Again, that's something entirely subjective and you may prefer one presentation over the other. So this gives you a good idea of how your games would look on each of these TVs and should, I hope, help inform your buying decision. It definitely has G-Sync enabled on this game as opposed to the previous game, and I do not see any tearing occurring on either TV. They are buttery smooth. Both TVs have a 4.7 millisecond input lag at 120 frames per second, but I have seen where Samsung responds just a bit quicker than the LG does. At 60 frames per second, the input lag on the LG is 9.2 milliseconds, while on the Samsung it is 9 seconds. So very similar, but again, the Samsung just edges the G3 out as far as input lag is concerned. As far as out of the box picture accuracy goes, we measured the LG G3 having a delta E in game mode of 1.7, and that actually falls within the range that's below the visually perceptible range of 2 or greater. So that is absolutely great. For the Samsung, it's an entirely different story. The delta E in game mode is 29, and at that range the inaccuracies are very perceptible even at a glance. Something tells me this is intentional on Samsung's part because they want to go for an image that pops and wows people, but it does so at the expense of picture accuracy. And if you are fine with that, then the Samsung is a great choice. If not, you'll have to customize the picture to your taste, but just know that out of the box, it is not an accurate picture in game mode. Both TVs also have similar peak brightness, where the G3 comes in at 1420 nits with a 10% window, while the Samsung comes in at 1380 nits. In the real world, that minute difference in peak brightness won't amount to anything actually perceptible. But what is important is the fact that the G3 has a built-in heatsink, so it can maintain its higher peak brightness for longer periods. So both TVs would be great for a bright room, which is an entirely new thing to say for an OLED TV, because they've always excelled in dark rooms, but with their high peak brightness output of the 2023 models, a bright room performance is not a big deal. They will do great in a brighter room. These new OLEDs are ridiculous, right? And speaking of new things, the keen-eyed among you may notice that I'm actually in a new space, and we are actually in a new home, and the past month or so has been consumed with just preparing, moving, unpacking, a lot of things. So I haven't been uploading as much as I want to, but I'm carving out a new space, a new office space, temporary as it is, to do all of that. So I'll need to transform this area into what I envision and what I want my office slash entertainment room to be. And I also have to work on a new home theater, because a new space means a new home theater. So that will have to be built, and we have a dedicated space. That's what we'll have this time for that. So I am really looking forward to that, but that is to come. I have a video just going through a little tour of the house to show you guys what in here actually looks like. So keep an eye out for that video as well. But back to the TVs. Now, these two TVs are pretty high-end on their respective lists. The G3 sits above the C3, and the S95C sits above the S90C, which is new for 2023. It did not exist in 2022. So that's the step-down version. They do not get as bright, neither the C3 nor the S90C, but if you want all the features and you have, say, a light control room, no, that may be the better option, because it gets you most of the way there without all that money. Also, the previous year's TVs are also an option, because those also get you about 90% of the way without the additional cost. The G2 doesn't get quite as bright as the G3, but if you're in a light control room, then that may not be necessary. It's pretty much the same TV as far as design is concerned, because even last year's stand fits on this year's TV, which is what I've been using. But as you saw, both of these TVs have their unique way of presenting gaming content, and it depends on which fits your bill. If you like a more punchy, in-your-face, saturated experience, then the Samsung has the better presentation, while if you want a more accurate, true to life or true to the creator's intent, then the LG would be the way to go. As far as the actual gaming features are concerned, they both are pretty much par, but the LG, like all LG HDR TVs, support Dolby Vision and Dolby Vision gaming, while Samsung does not, and they haven't. So you'll have to rely on just HDR10 gaming, while on the G3 you can game in HDR10 and Dolby Vision, because as you may know, the Dolby Vision HDR standard includes metadata for scene-to-scene brightness control of the content being displayed. Besides the gaming features are concerned, they're pretty much on par. The presentation is the biggest difference you'll see with both TVs. And that kind of extends to their movie mode as well, where in the movie mode for the Samsung, it's not quite as accurate as the cinema mode on the LG. But again, some people may like that presentation. So if that's you, then the Samsung is a great option to go with. And in movie mode, they don't support Dolby Vision, as I mentioned before, while the LG does it. So it's all a matter of where your priorities lies and what's important to you. The Samsung supports HDR10 Plus, which is their version of HDR standard with dynamic metadata. So they have an alternative. It's just not as widely supported as Dolby Vision is. That said, some streaming devices like the Apple TV 4K have HDR10 Plus support now, so you can have that if you are going with the Samsung S95C. But yeah, stay tuned for the review of the S95C and the picture comparison, because I'm sure that will be both enlightening and very interesting. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't yet. Until next time, this has been your friendly neighborhood villain man saying be safe and peace.